good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you are joining us from around the world. This is Tipping Point, and I am your host, Andrew Potkowitz. We are joined today by Shyam Sridhar, who is the VP of Client Services at Fulcrum Financial Services. That is a bit of a tongue twister for me. Welcome, Shyam.
Hi, Andrea. Thank you for hosting me.
Really appreciate you joining today. We meet here weekly with industry and thought leaders in the digital and tech space to really, pick your brains and learn along the way. And I know you're on the move today, so I really appreciate you joining and stopping on the way to the airport to accommodate us. For folks out there in the audience, we are live across LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. If you've got any questions or comments, please feel free to jump into the chat in that respective platform and drop a note, and we'll get to it along the way. So with that being said, where are you today?
I'm in Jacksonville.
Jacksonville.
So, yeah, I'm headed to the airport and towards DC.
Okay.
So,
And you've been
good day.
traveling around, I think, for the past week or so, from St. Louis and Kansas City and around.
Quite a bit. It's been very exhaustive. The week's been exhaustive. Started with Chicago and then, St. Louis and then Chesterfield and then Jacksonville today, later in the day in DC, and tomorrow is DC. Head to London later in the evening tomorrow. So, yeah, productive week. I must say, I think it's been wonderful meeting a lot of our team guys and customers, prospects, and learning all the good, better, and best of us. I'm probably not saying the good, bad, and ugly because I think we're doing so well. The team is doing so well. All of us have been so supportive. I think it's going well. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I imagine you haven't had a tremendous amount of time to do any sightseeing and do any personal things with your packed schedule.
No.
Can you tell us a little bit about your professional journey? How long you've been in this space, how long you've been with Fulcrum, and a little bit about your role within Fulcrum.
Oh, fantastic. I think I'm relatively young in the industry when you compare to most of the others. I'm just about 20 years in the industry now. And so I think to talk about how long I've been in Fulcrum, tomorrow marks my ninth year
Oh
within
wow!
Fulcrum. Yeah,
Well, happy early anniversary.
thank you. Thank you. It's been a lovely journey all throughout. I think a lot of learnings, I must say. I think I've been a continuous learner throughout. It's probably what keeps us all going.
Yeah.
So 20 years of journey, and it's seen the good, bad, and ugly of what's all happening throughout. A lot of scars on the hands and the back during this process. So yeah, I think learn through the way. So it's
Well,
been
like we always say, tech and digital is not easy for anyone. There's always challenges along the way. It certainly never gets stale. So I want to say it keeps us young, but I fear it makes us old quickly in this space. Um, so, currently, you're working across a number of financial services projects and clients, certainly, which we can't really name there, obviously, publicly. But can you tell us a bit about the landscape currently? I am someone, and I'm certainly aging myself here. I grew up writing checks when I was, a teenager, and in college, I would write checks to pay for the things that I needed and wanted. And if you couldn't find an ATM anywhere, you were in trouble. That has dramatically changed over the past, 20, 10 years in particular. Can you talk a little bit about some of the trends that we're seeing in the technical space, the digital space, and around financial services?
Yeah, I think it's come a long way, right? I mean, think about going back in our much younger days. Um, Probably you've been seeing checks. I think when I was much younger, it used to be working with cash and teller, people behind the teller, the other side of the teller, writing the challons, starting the queues, and getting things going. From there today, we are at the brink of saying just click a button on the communication device, which is probably a phone, but it's more than a communication device today because you're doing banking on it. It's just a click of a button, the whole payment is done. You can end up buying cars through your Apple Pays. So that's how the world's transformed. It's like a 180 degree space shift. So yeah, I think it's a lot of transition to put it that way. I think it's pretty hard to summarize in one line how it has come along. right? So we were all being writing checks. Then we started using the credit cards, the debit cards, and the good old days when the cards were swiped across the machines and you had to sign it. And then, came the next leg where you could use your cards to put into the teller machines and withdraw money. That was fascinating back then. It was like, wow, how
Yeah.
does this work? Like,
I
but
remember the machines that they would do the imprint of the credit
yeah,
card, and it was
yeah,
a threefold carbon copy.
that is correct. Yeah. Now that itself was like a revolution, saying, okay, how does money transfer with just swiping something on the plastic card?
Yeah.
And then came along the way wherein we could log into the internet and start looking at our bank accounts, start transferring money across, and then just transferring money between people became a transactional process where people could start purchasing things on the internet, and that kind of led to the way of the iPhone era or the smartphone era where apps became existent and became more dominant than existent, where all the transactions could, all these transactions, the purchases, and everything that you speak in the finance space happens through the apps. And further down the line, as it's going ahead now, you're probably seeing that the payments is happening without the bank. You're able to, just transfer with just between two apps, with two mobile numbers. The world is all going that way, wherein people would just say, Andrew, can I have your mobile number? I think I have to transfer you X dollars, X pounds, whatever. And that's being in the same location. And looking forwards, this is what's going to head to people who are in different countries, probably, the cross borders. Probably you're going to be here in your New York City, and I'm from London, right? I live in London. So if I have to transfer money to you, I can just ask your number and start transferring. I think that's the way forward. So that's how the journey has been, and it's going to get to. This has
Yeah.
been how the digital space has advanced.
Yeah, no, absolutely. By the way, you do have a hello from someone out in the audience, Nageswara. Not sure if you know, but they're saying hello. Um, and you live in London. Certainly, the UK and the EU has been, I think, historically a bit more early adopters when it comes to tech on the financial services side. I remember the first time I saw a table side credit card processor. I couldn't believe it. And meanwhile, I think in the US, it took another 2 or 3 years for even chip cards to roll out. So I'm always curious about that evolution, regionally. But what are you seeing now when institutions are looking in the financial space, are looking at digital transformation, and they're considering all the different initiatives that are out there in the market, whether it's working alongside FedNow, or the account to account payments, or buy now pay later, and all these various things. Um, where what does it look like, working through those requirements and understanding and helping folks in that space prioritize the most important thing to invest in?
No, while I answer this, probably what kind of piqued my attention is when you mentioned about the card payments in the UK and how it
Yeah.
is in the US. The I make quarterly trips to all sides of where our customers are. So the previous quarter when I was here in the US, and when I was trying to buy a cup of a coffee in the Starbucks, any coffee shop, it was still the days when I had to put my card in the machine and pull it out.
Right.
And I must quite admit, it was a pretty embarrassing moment because I don't remember the last time I put a password on my credit card. So
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay. Now I have to look at that and put it in. But Europe is moved a long way ahead because we are all in the contactless era there.
Yeah.
We don't use a card. All I do is use my watch. Just tap it and go. It does all the payments, everything, wherever I need. So that's the way we are in. But now, I think this time, this week, when I've been looking at things here, contactless has been adopted. It's there in most of the places. I think I haven't used my card to swipe it, but for the restaurants and where I'm gone, most of the places it's just been contactless. So that's a good progress,
Yeah.
right? On the same lines, when I kind of look back at what the Asia Pacific is, Europe was an early adapter. adopter, but Asia Pacific kind of rapidly grew during the pandemic.
Yeah.
So when I kind of see how, who leads the curve if we were to have a race with three different regions, the Americas, the Europe and the Middle East, and the Asia Pacific, I think Asia Pacific is far ahead in the lead. The other two regions, we are in the catching up game, to put it that way. So, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, that's where it is. I tell you, the other reason why I kind of linked to that is because you brought up this interesting Fed now in the US here, right? I think.
Yeah, and that was a long time coming. So please, for those of us in the audience who are novices here, can you educate us a bit on how long FedNow has been in the works, when it rolled out, and what that means?
Redna has been in the works for at least good 5 plus years. It's been the workshop. It's
Okay.
been there around. There's been a lot of works, right from conception to putting together a few bits and bobs. It's a very it's not a very openly put out thing, so it's a very confidentially done. To be fair, FedNow doesn't even disclose what's the technology stack behind it, how it is typed. But yeah, I think they've tried to work for it a long way. And the idea of bringing in FedNow was to have a local Fed real-time payments engine in the US. So, for most of us who probably are not fully aware, until recently or even now, it's the Vocalink's infrastructure, the clearinghouse is adopting to, and all the real-time payments are happening through that. And with the launch of it now, which happened a bit early in the year, it's continuously evolving and progressing. So a lot of banks, insurers, acquirers are trying to adopt to it. So what it means is, I think much sooner than later, we'll be seeing a lot of FedNow related services, which is going to help in all the real-time payments and transactions in the US. So to kind of compare it, it's more similar to, I wouldn't say similar, a lot of differences, but it's still pretty close as a comparison to how the UPI in India works. So relatively around it, but yeah, it's one of the key things to watch out for. How the Fed now is going to enhance, because today it's only about business to businesses, whereas UPI goes to consumers. So here we're just talking about how businesses or banks and institutions can adopt to a FedNow platform and make their transaction. It'd be a very interesting space to see how this is going to enhance the whole, the settlement, the payments, and the 9 yards of the financial services space.
Yeah, so what I know about FedNow is it's the Federal Reserve's, as you said, instant payment platform. What I'm curious, as I said, a novice here at best, is how does this impact other? How does this in fact impact the consumer like me, with respect to other payment options like your PayPal's or your Venmos or your other, regional or global money transferring applications? Is this a competitor to those? Do they augment those? Help me understand, or help us understand what how FedNow fits into the landscape of payments options.
Right now is to compare it to, to put it this way, it's probably explained a bit differently. Hopefully, try to make it more simpler. That's what I'm trying to. So FedNow is a platform which banks and institutions can adopt.
Okay.
So in the financial services space, we're looking at banks as one of the pillar. We're looking at fintechs and the PSPs as the other bunch of people.
Okay.
So who exist in the ecosystem. So the banks and the PSPs and these fintechs, they go in parallel. At some point, there's a converging point, but they're never the same. They're both very different, right? So FedNow kind of connects the banks,
Got it. Okay.
whereas the fintechs, like the Venmos, the PayPal's, the PaySend, the Zoom, and the other bunch of them which are existing, they they are PSPs which enable the real-time payments by eliminating the cards. So technically, FedNow coming in would probably help consumers as us see transactions happen more real time when we're
Okay.
doing transactions to the bank. But it technically may not impact, or we wouldn't see too much of difference by using the Venmo or the PayPal. So on the other way to say it, FedNow is impacting the institutions and the banks. Probably consumers as us, we're probably not seeing too much of difference whether it's FedNow or it is some other infrastructure behind. It's probably the backend platform
Interesting.
which connects.
So FedNow, in some capacity, at least in the U.S., helps commoditize and democratize the payment space by allowing potentially lowering barriers to entry for new fintech payments platforms to enter the market because they can leverage FedNow as sort of the middleware back end to connect banking systems.
The future. That's
Yeah,
the future. It's a bit too early to say it right there, but the messaging platform what the fintechs adopt and the FedNow is built leveraging is the ISO 222 standards.
right.
That's the one which exposes APIs and where data can be consumed and transactions can be made, and the data can be consumed to make very intelligent marketing, intelligent transactions, intelligent solutions, intelligent platforms, which benefits consumers like all of us. So the way forward, it could definitely benefit all of us in this space, and it's also going to be like supporting a lot of transactions across countries.
Yeah.
Today, FedNow is all the USA related. Like the FedNow, we have other clearing houses in different parts of the world. If the messaging standards become uniform, and with certain elements of compliances and checks and regs put in place, there could be a much smoother implementation of cross-border services. So transactions, the example that I gave kind of earlier in the conversation, wherein I have to transfer about $1,000 or £1,000 to you for some, purchase or some kind of a transaction, whatever it is. When I do it, you're going to see it near real time, probably a few seconds. So before I pick up the phone and call you saying, Andy, it's there, you're going to be like, hey, I got some money. It's here. It's going to be that way. So yeah, it's getting the direction. But that's potentially with Fed now. As much as we are speaking about Fed now, right? I think the whole banking space is evolving. In the US, we're talking Fed now. Like similarly, we are looking at a lot of open banking to come up in the Latin America. It is going to enable a lot more, digitization, because what we want is, a much more digital economy, which is going to make world a much better space than a cash-based transaction everywhere, right? So it's going to benefit a lot. So open banking is kind of evolving in the Latin America. It's kind of in its, mature state as we speak in the Europe and the UK. India is way ahead of the curve again. Like I say, Thailand, Singapore, they're pretty good. They're well ahead in the game. But I think open banking is the way forward in the LATAM, in Asia Pacific, and other sides. We're looking at enhancing bill payments, and we're looking at enhancing QR-based services, trying to make much seamless cross-border based transactions, because when we look at it today, the QR-based transactions, which the UPI offers, is accepted in a lot of Asia Pacific countries. It's come a long way to the Europe. In UK accepts in many places. I think it's not too far before a larger forum in the EMEA, so as we speak, is going to be accepting UPI-based, the QR code-based payments, right? So in the same way, I think as and when different parts of the world is evolving in all these areas, the banks especially, we'll be seeing payments much smoother, which means as consumers, if it's benefiting so much, let's assume, or rather, let's take us, where a business had and see, we are looking at hundreds of thousands of money or whatever being transferred. We're talking about businesses, there are millions and billions of transactions that happens. The intermediaries is making tons of money, and there's a delay, obviously, between transferring of funds. All these transfers, if they were to happen much quicker, I would be very hesitant to use near real time, but let's kind of say progressively much quicker. Look how beneficial the businesses could be. The larger enterprises, the smaller businesses, everybody. So the money payout is going to be much quicker. There is a lot of benefit. I think the world is headed in a very constructive way with the digital economy coming in.
Yeah. Um,
That's on the bank side, right? I think on the consumer side, to say what's going to impact us more is the fintech
okay.
side, where we're speaking. Uh, just some time back, you brought up the buy now, pay later.
Yeah. That's
That's
a fascinating space.
yeah,
Certainly evolving.
yeah, it is. As much as I kind of hate the buy now, pay later, because it's like increasing the debt in the economy, but it's benefiting a lot of consumers. I think probably just because a few dislike it for a lot of reasons. When you look at the benefit it brings to a larger forum, it's pretty interesting. I think the fintechs are evolving around the buy now pay later. We're trying to see how it can get integrated to various PSPs, and the issuers are trying to adopt directly. because there's the competition that's going on. The banks are directly trying to compete with the fintechs to see if they can provide a buy now pay later scheme or how it is. It's a challenging space for the issuers and banks to adopt because
So
the
sorry,
fintechs.
Shem, to interrupt you. Just to get some clarity here. The old buy now pay later model, the Klarnas and Affirms and Afterpays of the world that you would see on, say, a commercial of e-commerce site, where you get the product up front, the merchant gets paid up front, and then the consumer is supposed to be paying in 4 payments, let's say over 6 months or whatever it is, to pay for that good. So, whereas we used to have sort of layaway where you pay over a series of months, then you get the product at the end. Now you get the product up front, and then certainly, I think in particular, looking at Gen Zs and millennials who would make a lot of these purchases that maybe they couldn't afford, and over time those debts started being problematic for some of these traditional buy now pay later models. How is the new sort of buy now pay later 2.0? Can you talk a little bit about how that's looking at that and tackling that problem differently?
The buy now pay later is pretty interesting concept as a whole because the traditional ways of buying where had a lot of even interest component which the consumer had to pay.
Yeah.
There are not too many places where we could talk about saying something like a 0%. The consumer is not paying anything extra and additional. Whereas in the buy now pay later, it's a bit different. So you technically just split the payments into whatever duration it has to be, and then you're not paying any interest. That's
Right.
like the fundamental difference of how it is. So now, how the whole buy now pay later is trying to get evolved a bit more is the initial transactions were all about smaller key values. We were not talking about let's look at buying a car and see what can we do about it.
Right.
It's probably not the best example I can go, but what I'm trying to say is the large volume transactions.
Correct.
The idea is to see how the whole buy now pay later can be brought into that. Can Klarna of the world or the Afterpays of the world bring it? Maybe not, because it needs a lot of institutional push, which is not the kind of a banking. So the way forward, or the way it is getting or it's headed, is in seeing how the banks or the acquirers, the issuers are trying to integrate with the PSPs and see if that can be a model that can be extrapolated and that makes the dream of a consumer closer to reality by seeing how it can be done.
Yeah, we do have. Oh, I think I lost you for a second, and you're back. Just quickly resetting. We are on tipping point with Shyam Sridhar, who is the Client Services VP at Fulcrum Financial Services. For folks out there in the audience joining us across LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, by all means, if you have any questions or comments, drop them in the chat. We do have a question from one of the LinkedIn users, which is, would you see the metaverse could be beneficial, or how could you see the metaverse being beneficial, if at all, in the financial services space?
So, very interesting question. Let's see why. I think metaverse is like a universe in itself. It's a virtual universe, it's a virtual space. So everything that we're trying to do in the real-time world today, you and I talking over this platform, what we're doing, probably if it were metaverse, we would be having something similar in a metaverse environment. So if you're probably looking at, doing some kind of, the most easiest example, if you're looking at saying, trying to go do some shopping at the H&M in the metaverse, because H&M does offer that space in the metaverse. So if
Right.
you were to do that, you definitely need some kind of a transactional element.
Yes.
It can't be that we come outside of the metaverse, pay money, and go back into the metaverse and say, how do we go about it?
Yeah.
So that's the key bit. So financial services is going to definitely evolve into place. So we are seeing a lot of virtual cards, virtual currencies, and virtual ways of payments. It's an evolving world. It's not a proven thing which is already there. So as and when the metaverse is evolving, we are more likely going to see more sorts of virtual modes of payment and seeing how transaction could be brought in through and completed within the metaverse environment itself. It begins with a simple payment transaction. It's going to evolve into how does it get connected through the 9 yards, the the transaction, the merchant connects to the PSP, the PSP to the scheme to the the issuer. How does the exchanges happen? So the whole thing, what we are doing today in the real world, it's got to replicate in the metaverse at some point. I'm not saying this is going to be tomorrow, but down the line, it has to head there.
Yeah, it's a scary proposition, for someone who grew up, pre-internet, to think about a virtual world in which you are interacting and transacting. Certainly disincentivizes, folks from necessarily going out into an actual marketplace, but also in some ways helps facilitate, I think, conversation and commerce. I think to your point, it sounds like one of the biggest challenges right now, outside of adoption and engagement within the metaverses, is having, a common currency integration on the back end to allow those various metaverses, to process, right, to process the actual, cash transaction, as it were. But yeah, it's, I know earlier this year, maybe it was a couple of years ago now, I know the days are flying by. Um, Metaverse was everyone was going to do it, right? All the Nikes of the world were investing in their own metaverses and marketplaces. It feels like that's slowed down a little bit, you know, in favor of other technological adoption. But certainly, to your point, eventually, once the technology is ready, we'll get there. And I imagine something like FedNow, would help facilitate that, or at least help expedite the development of those types of platforms.
I think what's kind of making it more interesting these days than the metaverse is the GPTs and the
Ah,
AIs.
yes,
So today, all eyes, all ears, all the innovations are somewhere or the other trying to be linked to the Gen AI. Is it the traditional Chat GPT we're going to use? Are we going to just integrate with Gen AI, or is there something specific that's coming up? So that's like the way forward. But while we see through that the evolution, for example, our innovation officer itself in the company, he's looking at seeing how FinGPT
yeah,
can be, an AI or a Gen AI that can be consumed. That's an interesting one. FinGPT. What is FinGPT? It's like, we're talking about ChatGPT in the general sense. FinGPT has a modeling of its own which completely tailors to the financial services model. The banks, the fintechs, could be anybody who can consume. Early stages, adoption is early, but it's got a long future ahead.
yeah,
Because we're talking about how AI can improve the front end side of the banking activities like customer services to be more tailored. Think about it. You try to talk to your customer service. It kind of has all the things that you've done in the recent times, so you don't have to repeat things. So it's very personalized to you. You probably, a lot of banks have already adopted the voice recognition, but very few high street have done it. There are a bunch of them which are in the catch-up mode. But if Gen AI is able to do that to your customer service, it's going to be phenomenal. And
yeah,
we're talking about the KYCs and the AMLs and the bunch of fraud and fraud detection and fraud minimization and how the money laundering can be mitigated. Having people wear the microscopic lenses and see what it is, and think about AI which understands the model and tries to predictively mitigate things, put checks and balances in place. So that's the catching curve today. So we're looking at seeing how that can be integrated into what maximum places is possible. Just some time back, I was talking to someone here in Jacksonville, a CIO of an interesting bank. I'm not going to name it for obvious reasons, but very interesting conversations about how proof of concepts could be pulled along and what can be done using this, GPT, and how do we, be ahead in the curve, bring this thing to life and reality in the market. Very interesting conversations. I'm thrilled to see how we can go ahead.
and at the same time, the other side of it, I think, without understanding the technology behind it, is a little bit scary. Certainly, once you start talking about digital transactions, there's a higher risk of fraud, of security concerns. And when you talk about something like ChatGPT, where it's sort of content creation, right? Whether it's writing an essay or a blog post or some sort of content, the ramifications of making an error there are not too dramatic. I know there was a case, I think it was in New York, but I could be wrong, where there was a lawyer who used ChatGPT to write a legal brief that was filed with the court that referenced fictional cases, and there was censure and some severe ramifications there. Now, thinking about FinGPT and leveraging these algorithms to make financial decisions, can be scary to sort of contemplate.
It's it's very
So
similar
I guess,
to,
go ahead.
you
Sorry.
know, sorry, I just interrupted. What I was saying is very similar to having the faith by sitting in Tesla and saying it's going to drive me to where I want.
Yeah.
It's just there, right? I think it's fully software driven. If a software fails, you don't know what happened. It
Right.
does everything otherwise. You just in it. Think about it. The way things are going ahead, Tesla is going to be a payment method. Some point in the future, you don't need your card, cash, or anything. You're talking about commodities as payment methods thanks to open banking.
Yeah.
So you can probably, drive your Tesla to a Starbucks drive-through and it does your payment. You don't need to pull out your wallet. How cool is that?
I guess the saving grace of commerce is that you can't download a coffee yet. So you still need to go to Starbucks, like where you are right now, and get your coffee. But yeah, it's amazing. I think about banking when we had credit cards, and if the credit card was declined, you had to go home and call the credit card provider and understand what's going on. Whereas now everything's in the app and you get the notification that it's a potential fraud alert, and you can approve and say, I did this transaction, it unlocks your card. You can transfer funds, as you said, instantaneously across different banks and different bank. It's remarkable. Um, so I'm getting a little bit of an echo, Shem. I'm not sure. Oh,
Sorry, I think it's just my AirPods was running low on
no,
battery. I just switched to the speaker.
that's all right.
Is it any
Um,
better or is it still too bad?
yeah. Sorry. What time is your flight? Because I know you're heading to the airport from here. I don't want to keep you too long.
Um, how soon can we wrap?
I beg your pardon?
How soon can we wrap? I mean, I can spend about 15 more
Yeah,
minutes.
no, I mean, listen, there's endless topics I'd love to cover with you. I think we probably ought to set up another conversation because for a number of reasons, including that you are running to catch a flight. But I really appreciate you joining. I know we had some questions out there in the audience, so appreciate you guys engaging there. Um, I will connect with you separately and find another time so we can really dive into the other topics that we could get into today, because this is an area that I think is fascinating for everybody, is evolving quickly, can be scary, and without understanding the implications from someone like you, it can be a non-starter for folks to dive in and go through their digital transformation there. So looking forward to chatting again. I want to talk more about AI and Fin AI or FinGBT. I know Fulcrum is hosting a tech exchange AI summit in New York on October 12th. So definitely that would be a great place to come and learn more about it. I know the Fulcrum Digital website has a registration page for that. So please take a look at that if you're interested in learning more about AI. Shyam, thanks so much. Safe travels. And we will connect again soon on this.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and the rest of you who are here. It's been a
Thanks
great
very much.
conversation. Thank you.
All right. Safe travels.